Today, we're diving into the story of one of the world's nearest countries, a nation that also happens to have one of the oldest and most powerful stories of survival you'll ever hear. This is the incredible, unbreakable journey of Timor-Leste. So, here's the big question we're tackling. How does a nation that only came into being in the 21st century manage to endure millennia of history, centuries of colonization, and a horrifically brutal occupation to finally win its freedom? It's an epic tale, so let's get into it. You know, our story doesn't start with flags or treaties. It starts way back, a staggering 42,000 years ago. And that's not just some random number. It represents the incredibly deep, ancient roots of the Timorese people. We're talking about one of the earliest seafaring communities in all of human history. And think about what that really means. The first people who came to Timor weren't just accidentally drifting along. No way. They were highly skilled mariners. We know this from archaeological finds. They were catching and eating deep-sea fish. That requires some seriously sophisticated maritime tech for the time. Their whole culture was shaped by the ocean, right from the very beginning. So long before any European ships appeared on the horizon, Timor was this complex patchwork of highly organized societies. And at the very heart of each community, you'd find the Umalulik, the sacred house. This was so much more than just a building. It was the absolute spiritual and political center of their world, the anchor for their entire identity. It shows a society that was anything but simple. So, what brought the outside world knocking? Well, it was a tree. Seriously. Aromatic sandalwood. It was so valuable across Asia, they called it white gold. And it was this fragrant wood that first drew Portuguese traders to Timor's shores right around 1515. That single resource kicked off more than 400 years of colonial presence. And then, the island started getting carved up, not by its own people, but by colonial powers thousands of miles away. A whole series of treaties, starting in 1859, literally drew a line down the middle of the island. Portugal got the east, the Netherlands got the west. This rigid, totally artificial border completely ignored the ancient connections and territories that had existed for millennia. This next number, it's just devastating. During World War II, somewhere between 40,000 and 70,000 Timorese people died. It wasn't their war to begin with, but because of the island's strategic spot on the map, they were dragged into an absolutely catastrophic conflict. But here's why that incredible sacrifice is so important to the story. There was a small Australian commando unit, the Sparrow Force, fighting a guerrilla war against the Japanese. The only reason they survived was because the Timorese people risked everything to give them food, shelter, and intelligence. This forged what many Australians later called a debt of honor, a moral obligation that would become a powerful rallying cry for Timor-Leste's independence decades down the road. Okay, let's jump forward to the 1970s. A revolution back in Portugal means it's suddenly shedding its colonies. In Timor, this sparks a period of chaos, even a brief civil war. Out of this, the main nationalist group, Frelimo, comes out on top, and with the Portuguese gone, they declare independence. For one brief shining moment, Timor was free. But that freedom lasted for just 9 days. On December 7, 1975, Indonesia launched a full-scale invasion. And because this was the height of the Cold War, Western powers like the US and Australia, well, they just looked the other way. They were more worried about communism than a small nation's right to self-determination. And so began a brutal 24-year occupation. The human cost of that occupation is almost beyond comprehension. It's estimated that up to 250,000 people died. That's nearly 1/3 of the entire population, wiped out by fighting, by famine, by disease. It's a trauma that is burned into the nation's very soul. So how on earth do you keep hope alive against those kinds of odds? Well, the Timorese resistance was nothing short of brilliant. It was this sophisticated three-front war. You had the armed guerrillas, Falintil, fighting in the mountains. You had a secret, clandestine network of civilians feeding them intelligence. And you had a diplomatic front, with activists working tirelessly overseas to make sure the world didn't forget them. But for years, the world mostly did forget. That all changed on one fateful day, November 12th, 1991. It started as a peaceful memorial procession, heading to the Santa Cruz Cemetery in the capital, Dili. But it would end up being the definitive turning point in their entire struggle. As the procession of mourners reached the cemetery, Indonesian soldiers opened fire. They shot into an unarmed crowd, killing around 250 people in cold blood. A horrific, senseless act of violence. But this time, something was different. This time, there was a camera rolling. A British journalist named Max Stahl captured the whole thing. He managed to smuggle the videotapes out of the country, and for the first time, the world saw the raw, undeniable, visceral truth of the occupation. That footage was broadcast everywhere. It shocked people to their core and sparked a massive international solidarity movement that governments could no longer ignore. All that international pressure, combined with political changes in Indonesia, finally led to this moment. On August 30th, 1999, the United Nations oversaw a popular referendum. After 24 long years of fighting and suffering, the people of Timor-Leste were finally going to choose their own destiny. And the result was just breathtaking. I mean, despite a massive campaign of terror and intimidation from pro-Indonesian militias, people showed up in droves, and an overwhelming 78.5% bravely, defiantly voted for independence. It was an unmistakable message to the entire world. But the horror wasn't over. In a final, vicious act of revenge, the militias, with backing from the Indonesian military, went on a rampage. A scorched-earth campaign. They destroyed everything. Homes, schools, entire towns. They wiped out 3/4 of the country's entire infrastructure before a UN peacekeeping force could get in and restore order. So out of those ashes, they had to build a nation from scratch. But they faced a totally new kind of problem. Timor-Leste had massive offshore oil and gas reserves. The big challenge was avoiding the resource curse you see in so many other places, where that oil money just leads to corruption and conflict. Their solution? It was incredibly smart. They created a sovereign wealth fund to manage that money for the long haul. And the result of that smart decision is, well, look at this number. The Petroleum Fund today holds over $18 billion. This isn't just a savings account, it's the financial engine of the entire country, funding everything from roads to schools. It's the bedrock of their sovereignty. Which brings us right up to the present day and the most critical question facing Timor-Leste. The main oil fields are starting to deplete, so the very resource that built the new nation can't be the thing that sustains it forever. The clock is officially ticking. They have to diversify their economy. And they have a plan. It's ambitious, but it's clear. They're working to join the regional ASEAN bloc to strengthen ties. They're reinvesting in core sectors like agriculture and looking to build up tourism. But most important of all, they're investing in their people, building the human capital they need for a modern economy that isn't dependent on oil. And that really leaves us with this one last thought. The story of Timor-Leste proves that sovereignty isn't a finish line you cross. It's a journey. It's a constant process. After a 40,000-year history defined by an absolutely unbreakable spirit, the big question now is, how will that same incredible resilience shape their next chapter? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. If you learned something new today, do me a favor and hit that like button, leave a comment, and of course, subscribe to Info Now for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.